I'd like to talk a little bit about the research project. Although it says on the syllabus that you're required to turn in your research paper proposal, I want to put that off until next week, give you a chance to look at some possible topics and think about what you'd most like to discover in this Victorian research effort. So, um, here at the top of this document, I'm listing the parts of the paper that we're going to be following. And the first part, of course, is the rationale and 3 citations. I have very particular citations I want you to look for. Let's go through the possible topics. I want you to pick a particular work to analyze using either cultural criticism, psychoanalytic criticism, Marxist criticism, or post-colonial criticism. Again, whatever seems to be most appropriate for that work. And I want you to pick a work that you either now know that you love or that you research and fall in love with. So maybe this will be a work you've always heard about and never have had a chance to read. This is your opportunity to enjoy digging into learning about that particular work. So if you love the Gothic, consider working on one of these texts. Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Sheridan Le Fanu wrote a number of ghost stories. One of them is Green Tea. There are others you could look at. Elizabeth Gaskell wrote a number of ghost stories or stories with supernatural elements in them. And her The Old Nurse's Tale is frequently anthologized. You may have read that in 3314. Stevenson's The Body Snatchers, again, Robert Louis Stevenson, famous for his Child's Garden of Verse, for his Treasure Island, for Kidnapped, wrote a number of short stories that have a real Gothic tone based on his life in Edinburgh. M.R. James wrote a different ghost story every Christmas and invited his friends around his fireside to enjoy a glass of wine and let him read the ghost story to them. That was his Christmas Eve treat for his friends. Henry James, The Turn of the Screw, is really scary. Don't pick that unless you're prepared to be really um, um, upset, I guess I would say. Mary Elizabeth Braddon, Lady Audley's Secret. Wilkie Collins, The Moonstone or The Woman in White. Both are lengthy novels, but worth the read, especially The Moonstone. That's my favorite. Rider Haggard, She or King Solomon's Mines. Maybe you prefer realistic fiction, then consider Dickens' David Copperfield, which is, some people say, is an alternate autobiography of Dickens himself. Hard Times, which deals with Victorian education. Dombey and Son. Disraeli's novel Sybil talks about the two nations, the rich and the poor in Victorian England. Eliot's Mill on the Floss, Silas Marner, Daniel Deronda. Mill on the Floss particularly dealing with how society treats boys different than girls. Elizabeth Gaskell's Mary Barton or North and South. Both deal with the working poor. Elizabeth Gaskell was the wife of a Congregationalist minister and did a lot of work among the poor, and so her voice there is pretty authentic. Thackeray's Vanity Fair introduces one of literature's great, what should I say, hero villainesses, Becky Sharp, the woman you love to hate. Thomas Hardy, a personal favorite of mine. We're going to be doing Tess of the D'Urbervilles later in this class. An early novel of his, Far from the Madding Crowd, The Mayor of Casterbridge, or even the very latest, Jude the Obscure. Again, Robert Louis Stevenson writing The Beach at Thalassa, a colonial tale. Olive Schreiner, a South African woman writer who took London by storm in the late 1880s. with her Story of an African Farm and Trollope's The Newcomes. Uh, Maybe you love poetry or want to write on something that's a bit shorter. Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Aurora Leigh is not shorter at all. It is quite a long poem, but it is a Bildungsroman of a woman poet. Thomas Arnold, that's his father. Matthew Arnold, Scholar Gypsy, talks about a guy who just never went back to class one summer. Tennyson's Locksley Hall or Idols of the King. Again, Idols of the King. If you love the stories of King Arthur, that's the text you want to pursue. Browning, a number of his wonderful dramatic monologues that we are not necessarily doing in this class. Oscar Wilde's Ballad of Reading Gaol. Gerard Manley Hopkins' Terrible Sonnets. Again, any one of those would make a good subject for your paper. Maybe children's literature holds a special place in your heart and you'd like to work on Alice in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass, or Stevenson's Treasure Island or Kidnapped, Kipling's novel Kim about a British boy brought up in India, Kingsley's The Water Babies. Maybe fantasy and science fiction is more to your taste, and there's plenty to pick from in the Victorian period. Samuel Butler's Erewhon, if you spell it backwards, it means nowhere. It's a dystopian novel. George MacDonald is really the father of modern fantasy, and he was a great influence on people like C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. His Fantasties or Lilith, see where their images of high fantasy are coming from. Or H.G. Wells, who was writing in the late Victorian period, classics like The Time Machine or The Island of Dr. Moreau. So, in your proposal, which is what we're talking about just now, you are going to you're going to tell me why you want to work on this novel. Again, what fascinates you about it? What do you want to look at? What do you think is interesting about it? It doesn't have to be terribly detailed. And then I want you to locate 3 articles that will tell you something about this, either this specific book or this genre of articles. Note, you do not have to read the 3 articles before you submit your proposal. Just take a look at them quickly and make sure that they are actually connected to your project. So, but I'm very specific on which sources you use for this part of the project. You must choose from my sources listed here. All of these are available through the Fairmont State Library. Companion to the Victorian novel, obviously only useful if you are doing novels. Victorian literature and post-colonial studies, particularly good if you are doing one of the novels that has strong post-colonial content, something like Kim, some of the others. Here's another companion to the Victorian novel. Again, these are heavily focused on the novel. Social identity and literary form, race, class, and gender, and uses of genre. Again, focusing on the novel, but there might be information there if you're doing poetry. The Reform Acts, Chartism, social agency, and the Victorian novel, useful there. The Routledge Companion to Victorian Literature. So if you're doing poetry, this is probably where you want to start. Is there something related to the type of poem you're looking at, if it's a monologue, or the particular poem that you're doing? Gothic literature, if you chose something from the Gothic category, take a look at the table of contents here and see if there is something there that you can focus on. The Rise and Fall of Metre, Poetry and English National Culture, again, poetry focused. History of Gothic, again, take a look if you chose something in the Gothic section. Victorian Britain, there is something for everybody in this book. It is, I'm afraid, a print book. You're going to have to go to the library to look for it. Literary research in the Victorian and Edwardian ages. This is more a list of other articles you might be able to find, but take a look and see if there's something for you there. The Gothic and Death. Anyway, I've tried to isolate for you topics that relate. Doesn't seem like there's anything about children's literature, but children's literature would be contained under the companion to Victorian literature. And again, if they're novels, it would be contained under anything related to the novel. And Victorian Britain has something about all of these possibilities. So this is not due this week. It is due at the end of next week, but I wanted to give you plenty of time to think about it, start thinking about it, and perhaps reading again. I would, if you're not sure what any of these novels are about or poems, um, a quick Google search will give you some basic information there. And if you have questions, as always, please don't hesitate to ask me. Good luck. Can't wait to see what projects you decide to come up with.